The afternoon was supposed to be uneventful, just a quick stop at a local store. But for Lisa, things took a terrifying turn the moment she stepped outside. A police officer, his face twisted with anger, blocked her path. His voice was sharp, his words laced with something more than just authority. Lisa stayed calm, knowing she had done nothing wrong. But when he raised his fist, her heart pounded. Before she could react, a deep voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." The officer froze. Lisa turned, and there he was, her husband, David. He wasn't just any man. He was an FBI agent, and he had just walked into a situation that could change everything. The street fell silent. The officer's face paled. He had no idea who he was dealing with, but David did, and he wasn't about to let this slide. The officer's eyes darted between Lisa and David, his hands still clenched in a tight fist. His badge gleamed under the sun, but suddenly, it didn't seem to hold the same power. Lisa took a slow step back, her breath unsteady. She had seen officers like this before, the kind who thought they could do whatever they wanted, unchecked. But what had triggered his anger this time? She had only walked out of the store, nothing more. David kept his stance firm, his presence alone enough to shift the energy in the air. "You want to explain what's going on here?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, one that made it clear he wasn't asking twice. The officer hesitated, his jaw tightening. He knew he had made a mistake, but the question was, how far was he willing to go to cover it up? The officer's fingers twitched near his holster, but he didn't move. He was sizing David up, trying to figure out if this was a fight he could win. Lisa felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. People had started watching from a distance, some whispering, others pulling out their phones. The tension was thick, and she could tell David wasn't going to let this slide. "I asked you a question," David said, his voice low but commanding. The officer squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim control. "This woman was acting suspicious," he muttered, but his voice lacked confidence. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Suspicious?" "I walked out of a store with my receipt in hand." David took a step forward, his eyes locked on the officer's. "You targeted her for no reason," he said, his tone colder now. "And then you thought you could intimidate her." The officer swallowed hard. He had started something he wasn't prepared to finish. But the real question was, how far would he go to avoid the consequences? A muscle in the officer's jaw tightened as more people gathered, their eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The weight of their stares made his grip on control slip even further. His authority was supposed to be unquestioned, but now, standing in front of a man who clearly wasn't afraid of him, the balance had shifted. Lisa could see it, the hesitation creeping into his expression, the realization that he had backed himself into a corner. David didn't break eye contact. "You know what happens next, don't you?" His voice was quiet, but it carried a sharp edge. The officer let out a breath, but his fingers twitched again, still hovering near his holster. The crowd murmured. Someone in the back whispered, "Is he really about to do this?" Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. The moment felt like it could snap at any second. One wrong move, one reckless decision, and everything would change forever. Before anyone could react, another voice cut through the air, sharp, authoritative. "Officer Daniels, stand down." The crowd turned. A second officer was approaching, his expression unreadable. His badge gleamed under the streetlights, but unlike the first officer, his posture wasn't aggressive. Lisa's stomach tightened. Was this backup, or was he here to make things worse? David didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the first officer, watching, waiting. Officer Daniels' face went pale for a brief moment, then hardened again. "This isn't your concern, Miller," he muttered. The new officer, Miller, ignored him and turned to David. "FBI, right?" His tone was level, but there was something knowing in his gaze. David gave a slow nod. "That's right." Miller exhaled, glancing at the growing crowd. "We don't need to do this here," he said carefully, but something in his voice made Lisa uneasy. He wasn't just trying to defuse the situation. He knew something, and whatever it was, it could change everything. David studied Officer Miller carefully. There was something about him, calm, but calculated. He wasn't just here to de-escalate. He was here because he knew exactly who Officer Daniels was and what he was capable of. Lisa saw it too. The way Daniels stiffened, the way his fingers twitched. He was caught, and he knew it. But instead of stepping back, his jaw clenched, and in an instant, his hand went for his radio. "I need immediate backup," he barked, trying to take control again. Miller's face darkened. "That's enough." His voice carried a weight that made Daniels hesitate. "We both know you've crossed the line." David took a step closer. "Walk away while you still can." For a moment, it seemed like Daniels might push his luck, but then the sound of sirens filled the air. His face drained of color. He wasn't calling for backup. Someone else already had. And just like that, the real power shifted. The flashing lights of approaching squad cars cast a blue and red glow over the tense scene. Officer Daniels' breathing grew shallow as he realized the situation was out of his hands now. His authority, once unquestioned, was slipping away with every passing second. Miller turned to David. "I'll handle this from here." There was an understanding between them. This wasn't just about one bad officer. It was bigger than that. Lisa exhaled, tension finally easing from her shoulders. David reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Thanks to you." As Daniels was led away, the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Lisa and David walked away together, knowing justice wasn't always immediate, but this time, the right people had been watching. And as they left, David glanced back once, just to make sure. Some battles end in the moment, others are only beginning.